How long has it been since we got a new Electro character? Oh, almost 2 years ago. So there you have it. Clorinde is our newest Electro DPS, and although she's not game-breaking in any sense, she definitely deals solid damage, has extremely satisfying animations, and her own unique mechanic and playstyle. But what is that unique mechanic? Well,
for his neutral special, he wields a gun.
That's right, press your elemental skill and Clorinde will enter a special stance that allows her normal attacks to become pistol shots and her elemental skill to become a lunging sword attack that doesn't have a cooldown. Basically, shooting pistol shots will grant her 35% bond of life per shot, and using her sword attack will consume all of her current bond of life to deal more damage with the sword attack and heal herself. To get the highest damage on her lunging sword attack, Clorinde wants at least 100% bond of life, which is when the red covers about half of your health bar. That means your standard rotation during Clorinde's skill will be repeating 3 pistol shots into a sword attack until her special stance ends. All of Clorinde's important damage scaling does come from her elemental skill, so luckily for you, you don't even have to touch her normal attack talent and should level up her skill as much as possible before putting the remaining resources into her elemental burst. And speaking of her elemental burst, it's a super simple 15-second cooldown, 60 energy cost burst that deals a decent amount of damage. The nice thing about Clorinde's burst is that it also grants her over 100% bond of life as long as its talent level is 7 or higher. That means her full rotation will start with her burst to instantly grant 100% bond of life, then activates her skill stance to immediately press skill again for the sword attack, and then repeats the input of 3 normal attacks into 1 skill until Clorinde's special stance is over. Other things that you need to know about her kit is that if played correctly, she basically gains 20% free crit rate with one of her Ascension talents, while the other Ascension talent grants free damage multiplier to her pistol and sword hits in her special stance when any party member triggers an electro reaction, scaling with her total attack. This free damage multiplier actually accounts for a significant amount of Clorinde's damage and caps out at 3000 attack, but usually your build will net you a little bit below or a little bit above 2000 attack depending on your weapon, so that cap doesn't really matter without a ton of external attack buffs. And speaking of weapons, Clorinde's sword options are quite simple. You have the usual 5-star weapons that have crit stats and broken passives at the top, but then you have just one free-to-play weapon that clears pretty much every other 4-star sword in the game, which makes Clorinde extremely simple to build. For those 5-star weapons, the 2 best options will be the ones on the same banner as each other. Absolution is Clorinde's signature weapon and her best weapon, while Light of Foliar Incision is Alhaitham's signature weapon, but it does find a lot of success on Clorinde as well, should you end up pulling this sword instead. Light of Foliar Incision is best used in a Quickbloom or Hyperbloom team where Clorinde can opt for an EM electro damage crit main stat build or an attack electro damage crit build that invests in a lot of EM substats. This will allow Clorinde to double dip the value of building EM through increased Hyperbloom damage, but also increased normal attack damage in her special stance thanks to the Light of Foliar Incision's passive. Other 5-star swords that perform slightly better than your free-to-play sword benchmark include Haran Geppaku Futsu, Mistsplitter Reforged, Uraku Misugiri, and Freedom Sworn in that order of tiering. For your 2 4-star swords, we have the BP option, the Black Sword, or the Fontaine craftable Finale of the Deep. The reason why Finale of the Deep is so much better than any other 4-star option aside from an R5 Black Sword is because of the way its passive works. When equipped on any sword character, using your skill with this weapon will grant an attack buff and a little bit of bond of life, and clearing this small amount of bond of life will grant a slight boost to attack. However, the passive accounts for all bond of life cleared, including the bond of life that Clorinde can accumulate herself. That means when Clorinde naturally clears her self-inflicted bond of life with her normal gameplay loop, she'll easily max out the bond of life to attack conversion on the weapon passive, and at R5, Finale of the Deep ends up granting almost 60% attack, not even including its main stat. The only sword that can outdamage Finale of the Deep is an R5 Black Sword, and even that's only by 2 to 3% in certain teams, meaning it's only worth using if you already have an R5 copy that you used on another character in the past. Moving into Clorinde's artifacts, the more I tested and played with Clorinde, the more I realized that Thundering Fury is pretty dank when it comes to her. In order to not overcomplicate everything, let me just say that you have 2 standard sets that you can pick from, Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy and Thundering Fury. Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy is pretty self-explanatory. Clorinde manipulates her Bond of Life a ton and gets a ton of damage bonus from the 4-set effect. It's as simple as that. However, the one gripe that many players will probably have with Clorinde is that her skill stance duration is only 7.5 seconds, while the cooldown is 16 seconds. That means with the 4-set Whimsy or with any other set not called Thundering Fury, you almost have 9 seconds to burn between each Clorinde skill, which is extremely awkward due to the fact that most teams only spend 3 to 6 seconds setting up their support skills. Not to mention, some characters have bursts that have 20-second cooldown, which can be very difficult to sync with every skill use from Clorinde if her skill cooldown is 16 seconds. The solution to these issues is the 4-set Thundering Fury, which will usually reduce her skill's cooldown to about a 12-second cooldown based on how many electro reactions Clorinde is able to trigger, and is most consistent in Quicken teams since other teams like Overload can easily have your pyro character steal all of the reactions and result in a pretty much useless 4-set effect. Having an effective 12 to 13 second skill cooldown with Thundering Fury is much more manageable because your full rotation can become 24 to 26 seconds with 2 Clorinde skills, which is a very common rotation duration for supports that have significantly longer burst cooldowns or significantly shorter skill and burst cooldowns compared to Clorinde's base 16 second skill cooldown without Thundering Fury. For example, one of Clorinde's best teams is a healerless team with Fischl, Nahida, and Furina due to her ability to self-sustain herself. In this team, you'll start with Furina's skill, set up all of Nahida and Fischl stuff, swap back to Furina for her elemental burst, and then start Clorinde's rotation. After Clorinde's first stint of field time, you can swap back to Fischl and refresh Oz with her elemental burst, and remark enemies with Nahida's elemental skill before initiating Clorinde's second skill. Although your individual damage numbers with Thundering Fury might be smaller compared to Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy, having 2 skills per rotation makes up for the smaller numbers, results in very competitive damage between the 2 sets, and usually is a lot easier to pilot in Quicken teams. Other sets that are viable but not recommended over the main 2 sets include Maru Shisei Hunter, Echoes of an Offering, and Gladiator. Each set gets an asterisk because of their shortcomings when compared to Whimsy or Thundering Fury, but they can be used as temporary sets while you farm up the ideal pieces for Clorinde. Feel free to pause the video if you need to read to understand the specific shortcomings of each set. As for artifact stats, Clorinde is a standard main DPS that uses attack percent in the Sands, electro damage in the Goblet, and crit damage or crit rate in the Circlet. Elemental Mastery is a viable Sands option in Quickbloom or Hyperbloom teams that have Clorinde hit a decent amount of Dendro cores, but usually it is not recommended unless you have external attack buffs or Light of Foliar Incision. Attack percent is much more universal in the Sands given that one of her Ascension talents rewards building attack up to 3000. However, that also doesn't mean that you should forget every other stat and only focus on attack. Her substat focus still prioritizes crit over anything else, and then attack percent, elemental mastery, and finally energy recharge as the lowest priority. Energy recharge is not really important for Clorinde because she does get a ton of energy generation from her teammates, and her elemental burst doesn't really change her kit all too much, but a few rolls to get 110 to 120% energy recharge will never hurt to have. As I briefly explained in the artifact section, a Quickbloom team that takes advantage of both Quicken and Hyperbloom reactions tends to be one of the 2 best teams for Clorinde. The team consists of Clorinde, a Hydro Applicator, a Dendro Applicator, and another Electro character for off-field DPS. In the Hydro slot, one of the most synergistic characters we have with Clorinde is Furina. Everyone knows Furina is a stellar support for pretty much every character in the game, but a very overlooked part of her kit grants the team not just damage bonus, but also extra healing bonus based on her fanfare stacks. Healing bonus on Clorinde is especially effective because let's say in some random scenario, Clorinde heals herself for 20% of her max HP with her lunging sword attack. Well, the game actually counts it as 125% incoming healing because in order to clear out the 105% bond of life stacked from her 3 pistol shots, Clorinde technically healed it away as well. That means if we include the healing bonus multiplier, in this case Clorinde more than doubles the healing she receives, while the other random character that heals themselves for 20% HP only gets a slight increase from healing bonus. This of course results in much more self-sustain for Clorinde and much more fanfare stacks for Furina when the 2 are used together. So when using these 2 units together, it's really easy for your Dendro and second Electro characters to not be healers, but if you like the safety cushion, any team with Clorinde can still run healers as well. For the Electro slot, Fischl is by far the best option for how well she synergizes with Quicken, but other substitutes include Beidou or Yaimiko for damage, or Dori/Kuki for extra healing to sustain your other characters that take damage from Furina's HP drain. The Dendro slot's best option is none other than our resident Dendro Archon Nahida, but Dendro MC and Kole are both serviceable as free-to-play options. Baizhu or Yao Yao are your standard sustain units that also have off-field Dendro application. And lastly, for my players that don't have Furina, fret not, you can always run your standard Yelan, Kokomi, or Xingqiu as replacements for Furina, as all of these characters have good hydro application and other utility via their kits or builds that can benefit the team. As for the second team that Clorinde shines in, it's a classic Aggravate team. Because Clorinde attacks fast and often, she gets a ton of Aggravate reactions compared to an Electro character that attacks slow, and we want to play into that strength. A standard Aggravate team looks exactly like the Quickbloom team beforehand, but just swap out your Hydro character for an Anemo character. The Anemo character is either Kazuha or Sucrose for their huge buffs to Clorinde's Aggravate damage. Unlike other Aggravate teams, using Anemo healers with Clorinde's Aggravate teams is not recommended due to the fact that your team DPS will see a huge drop off without Kazuha or Sucrose, and for the fact that Clorinde has self-sustain in her kit. Should you want a healer because you don't trust that your other characters outside of Clorinde can stay alive, take Dori or Kuki again in the Electro slot instead of the standard off-field DPS characters like Fischl, Beidou, or Yaimiko. And as usual, the Dendro applicator can be Nahida, Dendro MC, Kole, Yao Yao, or Baizhu. Beyond Aggravate and Quickbloom, I found that the rest of the standard team archetypes were pretty mediocre in comparison. Overload with Chevreuse is a viable team composition, but there are two drawbacks that you need to know about. The first one I mentioned before, which is the fact that oftentimes your Pyro characters can steal the Overload trigger from Clorinde, which can negatively impact the overall effect of the Thundering Fury artifact set and encourages the use of the 4-set Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy instead. The second drawback is that oftentimes against non-boss enemies, the knockback from the Overload reaction causes Clorinde's sword attack to miss, which can result in a huge DPS loss. However, if you can circumvent these two drawbacks, then overall this is still a solid team. The best setup for Overload I tested was Clorinde, Chevreuse, C1 Thoma, and either Fischl, Beidou, or Yaimiko again. C1 Thoma is crucial for this team because he provides pretty much everything you need. Chevreuse does not have off-field pyro application, so Thoma's elemental burst fills that role to allow Clorinde to properly trigger Overload during her field time and also protects her from interruption with the shield. C1 on Thoma reduces his burst cooldown by 3 seconds, which puts it at a very comfortable 17-second cooldown that is extremely easy to sync up with Clorinde's standard 16-second cooldown when not using the 4-set Thundering Fury. Hypercarry is another team composition that still finds success like Overload, but pales in comparison to Aggravate given how restrictive its teammates are. This team pretty much only runs one setup, which is Clorinde, Bennett, Kujosara, and Kazuha. Although all of these characters have cooldowns that easily align with Clorinde's 16-second cooldown, the team isn't flexible with substitutes, and none of these three supports deal any significant damage themselves. In Aggravate teams, Clorinde doesn't lose much personal damage, but her teammates like Nahida, Fischl, Beidou, or Yaimiko can also take advantage of spread and Aggravate reactions to deal a ton of damage themselves, leading to much higher damage ceiling for the entire team. However, if you can ignore team DPS and just want to see Clorinde do a ton of damage herself, then by all means go run this Hypercarry team. But with that, hopefully you guys enjoyed this Clorinde guide, and most importantly, I hope this guide was helpful for building the perfect Clorinde for your account. Other than that, it's the same as always. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.